Right, so for more, we are now joined by a political science professor at UNISA, Professor Dirk Kotzé. Prof, thank you so much for your time and for joining us this evening. So maybe let's just start with Madlanga, because I also want us a little later on to also touch on the IDAC committee and the evidence in chief that was led by the NDDP. But I mean, we saw there the former Ekurhuleni employee relations head, Xolani Ngciza, and his statement just providing more insights into the operations and the management practices within EMPD. How do you think his testimony will contribute just to the overall understanding of governance failures?
Well, what we have seen actually for a number of days now, first with Mr. Spies and now again today, is very much inside information, detail about the functioning of the Ekurhuleni Metro Police. And the evidence that have been presented, starting with, let's say, the way in which the blue lights were used by Kat Matlala's security company, right through to the deputy head of the Metro Police, Brigadier Nkwanasi, where he was a law on his own, where he actually appointed himself as the acting head of the Metro Police and many others. So I think that was what General Nkwanasi, the provincial one from KwaZulu-Natal, actually had in mind when he implicated the Metro Police as part of the evidence that he presented on the 6th of July. I think now we understand really what he had in mind with his, of not only looking at the police at the national level, that includes now, for example, the crime intelligence and IDAC in the NPA itself and others, but also at lower levels, that of the Metro Police. And I think this should give us an indication of how widespread the infiltration was also by the criminal syndicates.
I mean, Prof, we just heard there from the Ekurhuleni mayor, Nkosindipile Xakaza, and him just speaking about the change in leadership and its effects. What would you say is that correlation between that constant change in leadership with a breeding ground for criminality?
Well, that is creating uncertainty. It creates also the opportunity for persons to be able to move around at will of those at the top who controls these appointments. And it makes it very much dependent on them, because if there's a lot of movement in any organization, and it depends on one or two persons that are really in charge of that, it gives them a lot of power, and makes those who are working within such institutions very dependent on them. Their loyalty, therefore, depends or provides them security. And that gives those persons at the top the power that cannot be challenged. So it's a very unhealthy situation from an organizational point of view. It does not allow for persons to do their work, but a relationship of dependency actually is established in such a way.
And of course, this then breeds a ground where public confidence and perception towards some of these entities is also eroded.
That's indeed so, because the persons who are acting there are not acting in terms of what they regard as the right thing to do, the right procedures to follow based on the merits of a case, but rather in terms of what are the instructions that they've received from those persons in control of the situation. And it depends then also on, that they must be in a blind way loyal to them and undermines their professionalism to a large extent. So it's a very bad culture that exists in such an organization, and can actually makes it very difficult for the public to trust them, because the outcomes of procedures that go through them are always dependent on the wishes of those within it, and not based on the merits of what is presented to them. And that is, again, I would say, part of the reason why some administrative or governance institutions don't have a high level of trust amongst the public, because their actions are becoming unpredictable.
Prof, I just want us to now go on with the ad hoc committee that sat yesterday and heard the evidence in chief from the NPA chief, as well as that Q&A session that she had with some of those members of parliament. And I think very early on in her statement or in her testimony, there was that bit of a deadlock between herself and members of parliament with regards to her naming a prosecutor whom she says the National Commission as well as General Mkhwanazi had come to her and said that prosecutor had been involved in organized crime but did not want to put out a name. Do you think this will set a precedence for other witnesses that would be coming to the ad hoc committee?
Well, I think what she was arguing was to say this person hasn't been charged yet. So she, in her own words, she said that it's an ongoing investigation and therefore she's not in a position to name this person. I think this is a general problem with witnesses either at the ad hoc committee or at the Madlanga Commission that in some instances they cannot name persons yet. They have information about them, but it either is going to compromise ongoing investigations or it will be able to warn that persons in advance that there's some action in the pipeline against them and they might take actions like deleting whatever is on their cell phones and the computers and what we've seen with Kat Matlala did. So I think these are all considerations, but it was very clear that the committee was very uncomfortable with her approach and tried to push her at all means in order to reveal the name of the person.
Speaking of some of those uncomfortabilities by the committee, one was that when she spoke about not knowing much about the PKTT, even with one member asking her whether she had any measurement in terms of the performance of the NPA in relation to PKTT cases. What did you make of that, Prof?
I think that the position of the National Prosecuting Authority is very much sort of in the focus of this investigation. That is why they form part of the terms of reference of the Madlanga Commission and why she appeared also at the ad hoc committee. Part of the NPA is IDAC, and IDAC has been fingered by General Mkhwanazi as an institution which is very important as a more or less independent investigative body that's part of the NPA, but also not part of it to some extent, that they are divided in the middle between the two sort of groups in the top of the police also. And I think that's part of the complication for her is the fact that she is in a sense responsible for IDAC, but at the same time they have a lot of independence of their own. At the same time, the NPA is very much under pressure because, for example, they are accused that they haven't done much in terms of implementing the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. And that's to some extent where IDAC comes in as a specialized unit to do that. But in general, I think she was there to try to defend her legacy as the outgoing national director of the NPA to a large extent. But given the internal problems and problems that she over the years actually presented to the public of that they have been infiltrated, or there were still a lot of people from the state capture years that were there in the NPA and that they could not produce the results that were expected by the public. She had to go to account for that amongst many other things in the session there. So she was all the time on the back foot. She was all the time sort of defending her record instead of being able to present the views of the NPA there.
I mean, you touched on IDAC, Prof, and there seemed to be a narrative of IDAC possibly being a reincarnation of the Scorpions. And at some point, one of the members was speaking about how maybe then IDAC would be used in the way that the Scorpions were used for internal factional battles within certain political parties.
Yes, the Scorpions is always in the background. And because the Scorpions were dissolved by President Zuma, or when he became the president, or many would say because they were too effective and they had too much power and they produced results. And because they were much more independent than, for example, the Hawks at the moment. And there's many people who are arguing that the Scorpions must be reinstated. So I think from that point of view, there's almost an automatic comparison between the Scorpions and IDAC, because both of them have a dual component, and that is that of investigation as well as prosecution, which is a very unique component or characteristic in South Africa, but does exist in many other parts of the world. France is one of them, and was mentioned by the director Baloy as actually a best practice type of arrangement. So I think in that sense, IDAC, there were very high expectations about the performance of IDAC, but no, it seems like at this stage, the way in which they've been used, for example, the arrest of General Kumalu, the head of the crime intelligence, has put them under scrutiny for the role that they are playing at the moment.
And when asked with regards to her view on the head of IDAC and in terms of the employment of, or rather her sitting on a committee where the employment of her husband took place 20 years ago, the NDDP came back and said, well, that was just an error of judgment of a young prosecutor back in the day. And when they were asking her whether or not it's not the same when it comes to General Kumalo and him sitting on a panel that interviewed but not necessarily employed the candidate in question, she did not seem to be too impartial about it. Is that correct, Prof?
I think this is what people are using as examples to criticize her, and to also to say, well, she is in a sense defensive towards some, with respect to some people, and others she's much more critical about, but she's not necessarily consistent in the way in which she approaches these sometimes quite relatively difficult issues or complicated issues. But yes, that is, I think, one of the many points of criticism against her, is that there appears to be in some instances some indication of being biased. She will most definitely deny that, and many other people will defend her for what she has done over the years and where she is at the moment.
Most certainly.
But I think many of the public will say, well, there are certainly some issues that more investigation, a clearer view should be developed about it.
Prof, let's just hold the conversation there. I want us to take a very quick ad break, and then we will continue just to give an analysis and an assessment of the ad hoc committee that sat yesterday with the NDDP, who gave her evidence in chief, as well as answering to those questions from MPs. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We are continuing our discussion with political science professor at UNISA, Prof. Dirk Kotzé, about the NDPP, Shamila Batoy, appearing before the Parliamentary Ad Hoc Committee yesterday. So, Prof, before the break, we were speaking about the lack of confidence that seemed to be from the members of Parliament with regards to the NDPP and the work that she had done in some areas at the NPA, and also the MK party just questioning her fitness to hold office. But I think it was Action SA's Darlene James who came in and accused the NDPP for not responding to emails that were sent by former Mayor Herman Mashaba about 4 years ago. And this was with regards to Advocate Chauke, who was not prosecuting drug-related cases in South Gauteng, even when he was presented with enough evidence. What did you make of that exchange? I mean, she even came with physical evidence of some of those emails.
Yes, that is, again, it's some of the evidence about, of challenging appropriate actions or lack of appropriate actions as the national director. The Gauteng director, Chauke, has been in the meantime put on suspension. So to some extent, the accusations against him have led to that. It hasn't been proven yet, but at least he has been put on suspension. He is regarded as some of the persons who still comes to a large extent from the state capture years, and that he is therefore one of the main persons who are regarded within the NPA as those who protected those who were accused of being involved in the state capture activities, and therefore the lack of progress with respect to that. I think in that sense, the national director, Shamilo Baloy, was walking a very tightrope in order to be able to keep the top leadership of the NPA together, but at the same time be able to try to produce results. And I think that is where the paralysis to some extent have emerged, is the fact that she had to manage a group that was almost unmanageable. I have spoken some years back already to some of those senior persons, and he said to me that is indeed so. That they are divided in the top leadership, and there's still a lot of people from the state capture years who were there, and to make it almost impossible to develop a consensus of how to tackle some of the very difficult cases there. So I think this is the legacy to some extent of Shamila Baloy is that yes, she brought the NPA together after the state capture years, but they were not very effective in taking it forward and cleaning out the NPA from those persons.
And in all fairness to her, I mean, specifically with the prosecutor advocate Chauke, she's the one that had put together to the president for the suspension to hold, and she said it was with regards to him not complying with prosecution policies, as well as a withdrawal of charges, of course, against Mdluli. Was it a fair narrative, though, for Action SA's Darlene James to make with regards to the president only reacting to that request by Batoy 2 years later, only because General Mkhwanazi made that statement in July?
Well, I think that's in the mind of any person who looks at that, whether it's fair or not. And that depends on the judgment. It's very difficult to say exactly whether it's fair or not. There are many factors that are having an effect now on these decisions that's been taken. I think what we are seeing now is a momentum that developed after General Mkhwanazi on the 6th of July made all these revelations and statements. And it is now much easier in order to act than earlier on. So whether it is even someone like the former minister Malusi Kigaba, that handed him over to the police also. So something is now developing. There's a new atmosphere. There's a new way in which processes are now picking up momentum, which didn't exist in the past. I would say it's all a product of the 6th of July statement by General Mkhwanazi. He opened up these possibilities for, first of all, the investigations of the Madlanga Commission, then the Parliamentary Committee, and now what has happened since then, and all the revelations opening up, making it known to the public. Nothing can actually be hidden anymore. And I think this is what really causes it. The same with Ekurhuleni, the deputy head of the Metro Police. The evidence that was presented to the Madlanga Commission is that he was almost untouchable, but today he's a suspended person.
Prof, I mean, you speak of a new atmosphere, and this new atmosphere quite a lot of the times comes with changes in how we do things as opposed to how they've been done in the past. And in the ad hoc committee yesterday, there was talk of the probability of the NPA becoming a Section 21 and independent from executive orders. Of course, the NDPP said that this model is used by very few countries, and she wasn't quite sure if it would be something that would work for South Africans. What's your view on that?
Ideally speaking, it is a good idea because the executive, the ministers of justice specifically in this case, is by implication a political person, whether it is part of a coalition or just whether it is a one-party government, it doesn't matter. It's a political person. And it's inevitable that in some cases there will be political influencing that does happen. It's just can't be prevented from happening. So if a prosecutory authority is completely independent, that is the ideal. And that is why I mentioned earlier on, there's some institutions where there's also the combination of a prosecutory as well as investigative agencies that are combined, which is also an ideal situation um, for special units that exist. So I think this is maybe a very important, very serious option to consider, but that will require constitutional changes because that will be something almost like another Chapter 9 institution or something to that effect, almost like a public protector, but with different and wider powers than what the public protector has. It is certainly something to consider given the evidence, the revelations that we have experienced lately.
And I think also, Prof, maybe this also speaks to the issue of the NDPP is outgoing. We're looking to appoint a new one. The channel was speaking earlier on to Dr. Jean Redpath, and she was saying that it seems as though this current NPA chief was disconnected and gave an impression that she was not really involved in serious matters, particularly in the country. For the future, we need to look for someone who's more hands-on. The president earlier in the week was answering questions, and one of those questions was in the composition of that committee that is going to appoint the new NPA chief. And like you mentioned, that being someone at the helm, being the chairperson of that committee is then the Minister of Justice. And of course, the president saying that he believes that she's very much capable in steering that committee that would recommend to the president. But other political parties were coming in saying that, but it would still be a person who would answer, so to speak, to the ANC because indirectly they would have been hired by a political party.
Yes, that is, one can say it's actually a bit unfortunate that this is the composition. We've just seen now, for example, the appointment of the new members of the Independent Electoral Commission. That is, in that case, the Chief Justice was the chairperson of that, together with other members of the Chapter 9 institutions. I would personally prefer something like that. To be at the top of committee or forum where the selection process will be held, and then it can go to Parliament. In the same way as judges are first identified by the Judicial Service Commission and then reported or refer it to Parliament, the same with the IEC. So there is a process that exists where there's differences is who are chairing that. And if there's an institution like the Judicial Service Commission. So I think we should start to think about something to that effect when it comes to the appointment of the National Director of the NPA.
All right. So, Prof, lastly, tomorrow, the ad hoc committee will see Cedric Ngabinde, who is the Chief of Staff of Police Minister Senzo Mchunu. I mean, he has been accused by Mkhwanazi to be the one who sent that letter to IDAC for them to investigate General Khumalo in that arrest after the complaints were made by MP member Fadiel Adams. What do you think we can look forward to that engagement that's going to happen between tomorrow and Friday?
Yes, well, in the first instance, he will have to explain why he did that. You know, a chief of staff of any minister is an administrative person. It's a person who administers the office of the minister, who is responsible for the diary, for the appointments, for the relationship with with the department of, in this case, the South African Police Service, with other ministries. So it's a purely administrative function. It should not be involved in decision making. It should not be involved in becoming to act on behalf of the minister or the office of the minister. So this was absolutely unusual. And he will have to explain why he did that and where does he did he receive this authority from, and whether the minister was actually giving him the go-ahead, the green light to act like this, and what else did he do in the past similar to these type of actions. So it can become a very interesting interaction between him and the ad hoc committee, because, as I said, it is very unusual, this behavior.